On September 21st, 2024, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Cambridge, Ontario was as ordinary as any weekend. Families were out shopping, children were playing, and the streets were full. Then, without warning, 4 members of the Hells Angels moved through a public parking lot in broad daylight. Their target was a small group of bikers wearing the colors of the Loners Motorcycle Club. Within minutes, the confrontation turned violent. Vests were ripped from bodies, an act considered a deep humiliation in outlaw biker culture. Later, police recovered 17 firearms connected to the suspects. This was not a simple dispute, it was a territorial message, part of a conflict that had been quietly building for decades and erupted again in Ontario in 2024. To understand how the province reached this moment, we must go back to the beginning, back to the origins of the Loners Motorcycle Club and their long, complicated history with the Hells Angels. The Loners Motorcycle Club was founded in 1979 in Woodbridge, Ontario by Frank Lenti and Jaro Rosso. The club grew rapidly, becoming one of the largest outlaw motorcycle organizations in the province. They demanded American-made motorcycles, expanded across Canada, and eventually formed chapters in Europe and the United States. By the late 1980s, the Loners controlled major drug distribution territories in Ontario. They remained independent, powerful, and uninterested in alliances. The arrival of the Hells Angels. That independence was tested in 2000. On December 29th of that year, 179 bikers from several Ontario gangs joined the Hells Angels in a massive patchover ceremony in Quebec. Overnight, the Hells Angels became the dominant outlaw motorcycle club in the province. But there was one club they could not absorb, the Loners. In the 1990s, the relationship between the Loners and the Hells Angels had been relatively friendly. Hells Angels from Quebec attended Loners events, and in 1993, their national president, Walter Stadnick, hosted a gathering in Wasaga Beach that brought together nearly every major Ontario biker club. Stadnick personally invited the Loners to join the Hells Angels. Lenti declined, but the clubs agreed to a business arrangement. For years, the Loners purchased narcotics from the Hells Angels, and both organizations profited. But the Hells Angels are known for takeovers, not equal partnerships. In 1999, the Hells Angels made a calculated move. They targeted the Loners chapter in London, Ontario. John Coates, a physically imposing Hells Angel from Sherbrooke, Quebec, was assigned to recruit members of the Loners, starting with his own brother Jimmy. Using family connections, Coates built a secret channel to sell drugs directly to London Loners, bypassing their president, Wayne Celestine. When Celestine learned of the betrayal, he reacted aggressively, stripping the men of their colors. This act of defiance placed him directly in the Hells Angels' crosshairs. On October 22, 1999, at a traffic light in Iona Station, Celestine's truck was ambushed. Shots were fired through his vehicle, but he survived. The attackers were arrested, and several men, including the Coates brothers, were charged. When they later returned from prison, they were leaders of the Hells Angels' New London chapter. The takeover had succeeded. Ontario Biker War, 1999 to 2002. By April 2001, the Hells Angels issued an ultimatum to the remaining Loners. They were no longer permitted to wear Ontario on their patches. The message was simple: submit or be erased. Some Loners joined the Hells Angels. Others, led by Celestine, joined the Bandidos, longtime enemies of the Angels. The result was a violent conflict known as the Ontario Biker War. From 1999 to 2002, tattoo shops, strip clubs, and massage parlors were burned. Shootings and beatings occurred almost weekly. The Outlaws' Woodstock clubhouse was destroyed in a fire. 15 people were injured. In the most intense period of the conflict, Police eventually shut the violence down through large-scale raids. The Hells Angels emerged as the dominant force in Ontario, controlling the cocaine trade and operating chapters across the province. Despite the losses, the loners never disappeared. In the years that followed, they rebuilt their Canadian presence and expanded internationally. Their independence continued to irritate the Hells Angels, who preferred total territorial control. Tensions resurfaced in 2022 when Ontario police investigated several confrontations involving the loners and the outlaws. In July 2023, a clash in Cornwall left one person shot and two stabbed. Days later, the Outlaws' clubhouse in Brockville burned down. In a suspicious fire, police issued public warnings, urging residents not to approach members of outlaw motorcycle clubs. In July 2024, several Hells Angels and members of their support club, the Red Devils, were charged after an assault and robbery in Hamilton. In August, police seized shotguns, rifles, and body armor during raids on local clubhouses. Then came Cambridge. On September 21, 2024, the Hells Angels confronted the loners in a downtown parking lot filled with families. They stole loners' vests, an act meant to humiliate rivals and assert dominance. Detective Inspector Scott Wade described the incident as shocking, not only because of the violence, but because it occurred in full view of the public. Police acted quickly. In October, coordinated raids across multiple cities seized 17 firearms, ammunition, a prohibited weighted whip, multiple vests belonging to the Hells Angels, cell phones, and stolen property. 5 men were charged, 4 of whom police identified as Hells Angels members. 1 suspect remains wanted. To outlaw motorcycle clubs. Patches represent identity, power, and territory. Stealing a rival's patch is more than theft. It is a declaration of control. According to police, the Cambridge robbery was a clear message. The Hells Angels intend to reinforce their dominance in Ontario. But today's loners are not the same club the Angels pressured in the 1990s. They now operate internationally, have relationships with multiple organizations, and maintain chapters across Canada and the United States. The stakes are enormous. Ontario's illegal drug trade is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Control of access points in cities like Hamilton and Windsor shapes cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl distribution across North America. Businesses such as tattoo shops, strip clubs, and car dealerships can serve as fronts for laundering money, while extortion adds to revenue. Support clubs are growing as well, providing fresh recruits and resources to larger organizations. Police agencies across Ontario are increasing surveillance and urging residents to stay alert. Ontario may now be facing the early stages of a new biker conflict. The Hells Angels have shown they are willing to use violence in public settings. The loners, after decades of independence, are unlikely to submit easily. A renewed war would not only threaten rival bikers but also risk drawing innocent people into the crossfire, as seen in past conflicts in Quebec and Ontario. For now, the province waits. The confrontation that began more than 25 years ago never fully disappeared. It simply went underground. In 2024, it returned to the surface, and once again, all of Ontario is watching.